What does a beautiful future look like to you?
You can flip a negative mood on its head.
This was a talk that was all over the place, but then New York, you are all over the place.
There are experiences that you just don't get anywhere else.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Jeff Gordinier. I'm from Esquire magazine. I'm broadcasting from the bedroom of my singer-songwriter daughter, Margot. Seems like an appropriate place in which to begin this conversation. I'm going to keep the introduction super short because honestly, I don't know that Tori needs an introduction, but we have here one of the greatest singer-songwriters on the planet, one of the great performers of our time, and the author of a new book, Resistance, a songwriter's story of hope, change, and courage, which is a beautiful and important book and a New York Times bestseller. So I hope you all pick it up, and we're going to talk a lot about that book. Tori, thanks for being here.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. And hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
How you doing? How you feeling?
We're here in farm country, so we see more animals than people, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And we're blessed to be in a recording studio in order to make music, to start developing songs that are reflecting stories that I'm hearing from people, emotions that I'm hearing from people, pain that people are going through, and also opportunities and visions that people are having in order to make necessary changes they want to make in their life. And hopefully the songs will begin to reflect that.
Nice. You know, that goes right into my first question. I thought, let's not mess around. Let's get right into it. There's a passage on page 47 that really struck me. You're talking about, you're writing about 2017 in this passage, and you say, people coming to the shows were sharing that they were feeling traumatized by this large scale and scary and political and divisive global rupture we were living through. The muses began to show me that each concert would need to address this trauma in every city, in every venue. I had never seen this type of trauma, and I had been playing shows for 40 years. I thought that was very intense and incredibly relevant to this week, to this moment we're in. How did that trauma manifest itself with your audience?
The audience was explaining to me what they were going through, realizing that by a year after the election in 2016, that they were beginning to see already huge changes in the way our government worked. And any idea that there might be some kind of leadership that would wake up and understand that we are a democratic country was apocalyptic. Understanding that, and the shock of that, realizing we are in for how many years of this. And I think that's a huge question that must come up right now, because we need to see what we're either voting for is a system of government in the autumn. And we're either going to vote for a type of democracy or a type of tyranny.
Right, absolutely.
And if that hasn't shown itself clear as a bell, if we can't hear that and see that, we're being shown what the option is. Right. And it's not going to get better after the election's over unless we vote for a democratic system of government.
Is this part of why you wrote the book? What inspired you to write Resistance?
Yes, it is. It is the reason that I was driven to. Rakesh Sachal, my editor, came to see me backstage at the Beacon in New York.
Oh, wow.
and said after a show and just said, look, I think it's time. I know some of your story. I know that you started professionally in Washington and you saw how the government was operating then and the seeds being planted off the K Street corridor then with think tanks and controlling the narrative and a war of ideas.
Right.
It didn't begin then, but it was consolidating itself. That was in 76 when I turned pro, and by the time the election in 1980 happened, I wasn't old enough to vote, but I was playing for these very powerful men. And this is when Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter, right. And I talk about it in the book in detail. Yeah. And one of the Koch brothers was running on the Libertarian ticket for the vice presidential slot. And so it was really beginning to see how the war of ideas was winning people who I thought I knew, grooming them and changing their minds. And now is a moment, if you can go back there and now come here into 2020, hopefully the book from a piano player's viewpoint, I'm not a political journalist, but from a piano player's viewpoint, I'm showing you how we got here just from behind my 88s, because that's the only experience I have is from really behind the 88s.
But that passage, those passages in the book were so remarkable to me that here behind the piano, performing songs, you could listen, you could hear the transition in the air, the transition in the room in these bars, like from the sensibility of the late 70s to the sensibility of the early 80s, the onset of the Reagan philosophy. Like it seems like you have antenna that could pick that up. It was incredible.
It was a point of view that when Rakesh said to me, you haven't really written extensively about this through your life, and journalists haven't always picked up on this, but he said, I think this is the moment where you talk about that how you thought our government was being run as a teenage girl, what you were being taught in high school was very different than what you were seeing. And it's true, what I was seeing was the power of the lobbyists.
Right.
And how the corporate world could invest in a politician and hire their lobbyist firm, and then, of course, push their policies through because of the money.
Right.
And the amounts of money became so gargantuan. And it was clear with 2010 in the judgment for Citizens United, which some of you know far more than I about, but others can look it up if you're not that familiar, and how that even strengthen the power of wealthy people to not just invest in a politician, but possibly own a politician. Right. So that we have a gaggle of oligarchs in the Senate and even in the House. And that's what we need to open our eyes to, that these people are not working for us. They might be working for foreign interests, whether it's the Russians or the Saudis, wherever they're getting their money. If somebody has dirty pictures on them, whatever. I mean, it could be both.
Right.
So that's really what the book was trying to kind of expose, where I first learned about this, and it was as a teenage girl in the bars 3 blocks from the White House.
Right. It's incredible. I mean, I also love the moment, of course, as I'm sure a lot of your fans know, when you were 13, you started performing songs in a gay bar, and your father is a clergyman, he's a preacher, and some members of his congregation, I guess, expressed some disappointment about this, and how he responded was brilliant. I'll leave it to you to tell people how he responded to that.
Oh, you can tell them. You can tell.
No, it's your book.
Okay. Well, he was so disappointed. He really was, and I can understand that now. We've talked about it recently. He was very
disappointed in what?
When I was kicked out of the Peabody Conservatory at 11.
Yeah.
And there had been a trajectory of hopefully in his mind being a concert pianist. But at the Peabody, we're going back again in time.
Yes.
I remember the power of the music of the late 60s and the early 70s, and how that was, inspiring different types of thinking, inspiring protests against the Vietnam War, coming out of the civil rights movement. All of that was happening with this amazing music. And I thought, I want to be part of documenting my time, not just playing songs that were documented 200 or 300 years ago. Yes, they're amazing pieces of music, but I didn't feel I was just an interpreter, that I wanted to be one of the sonic documenters. So that was a real pivot point. And that means then when I was rejected from the Peabody, my dad was heartbroken. So at 13, he finally said, we have to get a job because you're wallowing away. And he told me the story of Jonah in the Bible, and that I'd missed my calling from God. And so we went to every place and no one would have us. Nobody would even let me play. And finally, the last place, there was some guy, I think, with a stud necklace. And I was thinking, okay, this should be fun. And my dad said, I'm going to see the manager, and then can you give my daughter a chance? And he said, if she's any good, she can play for tips. So that was the beginning of that. And halfway through that night, I began to realize they were looking at my dad thinking he was in a costume. And then they began to help us. But the parishioners were not okay about that. Some of them were really up in arms. So he said to them, honestly, a gay bar is the safest place for a 13-year-old teenage girl. And he was right.
One of the brilliant aspects of resistance is that it's structured in a sort of dialogue with your own songs. So each chapter is interspersed with lyrics from your songs. And so I want to talk about some of those songs. I apologize for going way back to this one, but there's a KCRW recording of Silent All These Years with a Leonard Cohen poem that sort of fades into it. It starts with Leonard Cohen reading and then you start performing. And that version of that song has been with me for years. It just crushes me every time. I think it's amazing. So Silent All These Years. I've never
heard that. Jeff, I've never heard that. KCRW.
It's on one of their compilations, Rare on Air. The first Rare on Air that was, I think, a fundraiser of some sort that KCRW put out. I gather you were performing in the studio. This would have been in the 90s. It's remarkable. It's on YouTube.
Okay. Okay.
But Silent All These Years has an incredible enduring power for your fans. And it was pivotal for you, too, in terms of your own personal transformation. You write about how it sort of took you out of, as you call it, a very personal hell. What is it about that song?
Well, I think the song itself has been one of these things that came to me. And originally, I thought it should be for this wonderful artist called Al Stewart. Oh. And when the music was coming to me, I started thinking about, this should go to Al.
You mean that guy?
Yeah. Yeah. I did backup singing for him sometimes and stuff like that. That's and right. So the whole thing, though, was as I started to discover the song and learn it, understand what it was, the whole idea of finding a voice and then giving that song away.
Yeah.
The song itself was teaching me, okay, finding your voice and then using your voice and speaking from that place and pulling your head out of the sand and looking at your damage and then deciding what you're going to change. What are you going to change, Tori, in your life? What are you going to do? Because talking about it is the first step. And then giving away the song is the opposite of what you're supposed to be learning. You have to own this. And
That's
then
what the
you have
song's
to live
about. That's what the song
I know. Takes some time sometimes.
We're only human.
That's right. And the songs they teach me, but sometimes I'm slow to get what they're saying. Sometimes it takes a little bit of living with them and learning different facets of them and then applying them to my own life.
For years, this may still be true, but for years in your concerts, you did an a cappella version of Me and a Gun, which was incredibly stark and striking and impossible to ignore, just so powerful. We're talking about the early 90s. You were very directly, very unflinchingly talking about the patriarchy and rape and abuse, decades before Me Too became a movement. As you saw Me Too build into the movement it has become now, how did you feel about it? What went through your mind?
Finally, many women have been talking about this for quite a while. It just didn't have the internet push, and it didn't have the amounts of voices that it needed to shake that wall,
right?
To really move it at its foundation. Because, foundationally, people have been protecting other people for years and years and years, and not just in the entertainment business, the banking. I mean, I've heard stories from women in every business there is.
Sure.
That talks about a culture. Not all men were part of this culture. And some women were complicit in helping these men continue to be predatorial and predators. So it was across the board and is across the board. And I think the Me Too movement, what began to happen is we won't take this anymore. Things have to change, whether people were forced to change, because we're going to shine a light on this behavior and on you. We're going to shine a light now because there are enough. And whether you want to change or not, we're not going to allow this behavior to continue in the workplace or in this industry. And it's still a battle, but people wanted it to change. And I think we're seeing that that's what has to happen now with what we're living through this week, is that we have to listen to the pain and what the African American community has been suffering for so long. And we need to really listen.
Right.
And then we need to be part of standing hand in hand and making the change with them together.
Right. It seems like so much of your book is about listening. I was really struck by the aspect of your concerts, your set list essentially being an act of collaboration, like a practice of collaboration with your fans, where you arrive in a city, you're listening to what the local people are talking about. You want to know the local history of a region. You even talk about World War I in one passage, and then creating the set list based on those personal responses and that regional history. Have you always performed that way? Is that kind of listening booth approach always been how you do a show?
Well, it's just far more, it's kind of the way I work.
Yeah.
And being able to be in a different place with that ground, and the earth knows what's happened there. There's that consciousness that's, if you want to tap into it, you can do the research, what's been happening there for the last maybe 500 years if you really want to learn about it. And sometimes some things they weren't taught in our schools, especially if you're talking about Native American history. So it's really an opportunity, I think, for an artist to find, if I'm playing in this space and this place, the building itself might not have been there, but the ground was there.
Yes.
So you can tap into a timeline, and you can choose a particular one, or you can decide to do an overview of it with what's happening that very week as well. And people from that place, they bring me subject matter at the stage door that day, or a meet and greet. And then I'm tapping into what's happened historically there usually. And that becomes the expression, the collaboration that night.
Is this different than requests? I mean, this isn't just me coming to the door and saying, I'd love to hear Cornflake Girl. This is different than that. It sounds like people telling you their personal stories and wanting to connect with you musically because of that, right?
Yeah, it's usually, there's always somebody that'll say, play this or play that, because they want to hear it. And I get that. And sometimes they get their wish, but it usually has to work with the theme, the narrative of the night. And I think that's the idea, that people that are coming to that show are helping to build that show.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And I think, and they know that.
They're invested in it.
Yeah. And that's what makes it, a collaboration. And that's where the magic comes in, because before they showed up, we didn't really know what we were doing. Maybe they had an idea and I had a historical idea of something, and I've whipped a song up that maybe I haven't played a lot of and it wants to come. And then I add their take on that city that week. And that's how we're really in communion with each other in a present way, instead of I've planned this show months before, because we have to stick to it because I've got 40 dancers on stage. Not that you have 40 anymore, but you've got your 15 dancers. However, how many a bus will hold, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And they're nice buses, by the way. That's not a negative comment. The buses that the dancers are on are the same buses we're all on. But, I wish I had 15 dancers, but I haven't been that fortunate.
So it's like you're not coming to a town and inflicting a show on people, saying, well, this is what we're doing. You come, you listen, you sort of tune in, and then the show evolves. It sort of generates based on that conversation. I love that. That makes it, and it makes it more exciting too, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that other really great pop touring acts are inflicting anything. Sure. I'm not saying that. I thought that was quite clever of you, but I don't really see it as that. I see, though, that they don't have the room to just throw it all out.
Right. The flexibility.
And it's sound check. And I could do this with the band too, because they are just able to do this. Matt Chamberlain, John Evans, they were able to move fast. Yeah. So we would have a big repertoire. And then I would just be building the set list with them and the crew during that 4 to 6. That's why 4 to 6 is kind of sacred, so that I can build the show. And that's really where it gets built there.
In the book, you refer very frequently to the muses and to song beings, as you put it. And I got the impression and I spent some real time with the book, and I got the impression that these are real beings to you. They are not abstractions. They are actually couriers of information and connectors. And could you contextualize for us, like, who are the song beings and the muses, and what role do they play for you?
Well, the muses, I've always seen them since I can remember.
Sure.
And I think that when I started to chase more of a commercial path, then they started to get fuzzier.
Really?
I had a harder time seeing and hearing them. Wow. Just because my intention had changed, and it changed out of desperation. It changed out of being in the bar room for so long that I thought I'd die there. So I started to listen to what record company people wanted instead of how other artists do it, which is maybe taking a little bit on board of that opinion, but really knowing your true north and sticking to that, really sticking to that. Well, after being rejected on the path, I decided, okay, I'll fill a slot.
Yeah.
But I chose to fill it how I chose to fill it. The image, the whole thing. That's one I really have to own. So the thing, though, is when that failed, that was when it was clear that if I would commit myself, recommit to the muses, that they were there. But there was an agreement. I had the agreement when I was little, and then I deviated from that agreement. And then once I had that failed record in '88, Why Can't Tori Read? And a lot of it was because of my intention and that I was filling a slot more than just the music. It was the energy of why are you creating? And so once I got back to, I want to create and collaborate with the muses. And if people listen to it or the label likes it or they don't, that isn't really, if I have to make a living going back to the bar room, I'm willing to do that.
Wow. Yeah. And then the muses, they delivered for you.
They deliver, but they're demanding. They don't just give me sprinkles.
How are they demanding?
Well, okay, I could write a song every day.
Sure.
Most decent songwriters can, but that doesn't mean it's any good. And that doesn't mean that anybody will be moved by it.
Right.
Because there is the ingredient of something they bring. And they bring a transcendence that it's hard for me to explain, but it doesn't come from me. And I'm collaborating with them, and I'm hammering out the structure, and I'm working that chordal thing. But when I'm getting something from them, and I just push record, and then I have to translate it, and it's in the translation that the work comes, and that they push me if they think I'm being a bad translator.
Oh wow, amazing. One of the themes I love in the book is this idea of art as a refuge, and maybe even a source of self-care. You talk about Russia, and Russia being a place where people are bombarded by noise and disinformation and corruption, not unlike what we're dealing with now.
That's right.
and very similar, curiously enough, and that people there really find nourishment in music and songs they've always loved, in poetry, in the visual arts. Tell us about that. Why? Because that seems like part of the reason this book exists, is to express that.
It was an awakening for me to realize the power of art for some people, in that when they could reclaim, whether it's a novel, poetry, anything, and weave it almost as a shield in their aura system, then they were able to protect themselves against propaganda or technological warfare, because that was their truth. They knew that to be true, meaning they knew their relationship with that poem or their relationship with that song. That was theirs. And the songs have always told me, we have relationships with people that you don't need. It's none of your business, Tori. Once we leave, bye. And we'll see you out there, and you have your relationship with us, but we'll make our own relationships with other people. And that's how it expands itself. And that's how art can really work. That's what I love about it, is that to me, it's true magic. And I'm not having to go at illusionists, but music isn't an illusion. it's from the ether. It really, to me, is a time machine. It's a place you can go and you can travel without even leaving your chair.
For yourself, what would be those sources of nourishment? Where do you go? Are there poets you turn to? Are there musicians you turn to for refuge and, to sort of reboot?
Well, that is my little secret.
No way. The secret?
Well, they're my confidants.
Wow. All right.
Their work is precious. Their work is precious to me. And to be honest, though, to be fair, it's different people at different times.
Sure.
It's different people at different times. Tash might be hearing something that I've never heard before. She's 19, and she might play me something, and I just go, "Oh, wow, what's that?" And she'll say, everybody knows them, but that's fine, Mom. And so you just never know who your Buddha is that day.
Yeah.
It could be a book that somebody passes to me, and I hadn't heard of it before.
Yes.
I also have a library here at the studio that has books. I've been collecting books for over 30 years.
Wow.
Some are art books. Every time I go to the continent, I'm picking up art books. The bus is stacked with books I collect from all over the place and bring them back, and they're my reference points. So I'm looking at visual art. I go to the visual artists a lot. Of course, there's a whole poetry section and a big mythology section, but the visual artists are a big inspiration for me.
Wow. Most bands that I'm introduced to now, I'm introduced by my 17-year-old daughter, actually. So I can relate. Like Dream Wife, this incredible all-female band I went to see with my daughter. They blew me away. It's pretty exciting when you can reconnect to music through
check
that.
them out.
Dream Wife. Yeah. Yeah, I think you'd be into them, actually.
Great.
So I grew up in the church in California myself. I went to a lot of Bible studies. At one point, maybe 3 or 4 a week, different fellowship groups and Bible studies. So that part of your own background is something I have a kinship with, maybe. And I'm always interested in that with people, if they grew up in the church and they become artists, like how it affects their art. Do you see the presence of worship in your work, that element of sacredness, anything that kind of carries over from growing up in the church into your artistry?
Well, I resonate with what you just said in that some of those stories that we grew up with, the imagery is something that I pull in my work. And also the gospel music. I was fortunate enough sometimes to be exposed to not just the Methodist hymnal, but when I got the wonderful spirituals, and being exposed to that really gave me a sense of rhythm and a sense of, I don't know, a euphoria that can happen when you're communing with the Spirit. Sometimes my exposure as a minister's daughter was the institution and how the institution operated and the hypocrisy within the institution wasn't at all the path of Christ. And love your neighbor as yourself consciousness, that was absent a lot of the time. So going to the music, the ones that really spoke to me, that shows itself, especially in my left hand in that work.
In your left hand?
Yeah.
In terms of the sort of bass line of a song, the sort of...
the groove.
The groove of it, yeah.
Yeah, playing from here, the core, always the hips. You don't play from here. You play from here.
Right.
That's the power. That's how I do it anyway. People have to find their own. But sometimes when somebody just says, I want to groove more, well, you have to free your hips. And sometimes Christian or more Puritan type, when I say that, maybe maybe more reserved people who are somewhat religious have had a bit of a difficult time. And I try and get them to, I'll just say, don't be funny. I'm not being funny. But here, just put your hand on my hips and let's groove. And then I'm going to do the same with you. And we work it through together. And you'd be surprised. The piano players, they start to understand. I have to feel it to the bones.
Yeah.
You know, we're not just playing here. You're playing here.
But that was always a very distinctive part of your performances. You know, we're the same generation. I remember watching you, and I occasionally was worried that you'd get a backache. You know, that you need to get acupuncture or something because of like because I'm a piano player too. So I was like, God, that's gotta hurt after a while to play that way.
Well, I don't know. It was pretty freeing.
Yeah,
it was pretty freeing. I'll tell you what was difficult was doing it in high heels. That was difficult.
I've never done that.
Yeah.
Yet. I love this line on page 46. I'm sorry, I really did spend time in the book, so I keep quoting the book. But you said, I had made a commitment at a young age to fight that ideology as a feminist soldier for the great mother. It sounds as though in the book that happened when you were quite young. So how did it happen? What exposed you to that path of feminism?
Well, I had a grandmother that was, I guess you could say my father's mother, who, although very intelligent, she felt that there was a need to commit your soul to God and your body to your future husband and all your possessions to him. And I just didn't understand that. I was 5. I just didn't understand that.
Right.
And I had been close to my mother's father, who had a Native American grandmother. And his stories and his relationship with her was so powerful. And inspiring to me. There was something that was connected to the land. The narratives were connected to the land, and it just felt that stories came out from the land. And having these two very different, being exposed to these two grandparents, they were very different in their approach to me as a child. And I resonated much more with my mother's father than I did with my father's mother. Although I respect she was an intelligent woman.
I wanted to quickly get back to an aspect of songwriting and the muse. I think about songs like Crucify and Cornflake Girl, for instance. They're very profound songs, but they're also really catchy. Like they have a kind of earworm quality that a pop hit will have, and yet they're these profound pieces of artistry. They're kind of impossible to get out of your head. Catchiness. I wanted to ask you about catchiness in a song. Does that come to you naturally? Is that something you seek? Is that an accident when catchiness happens?
Well, it's not something you want to throw away.
No.
Catchiness is not something.
It's a good thing.
You know, it's like a good Bordeaux catchiness. So maybe though, I think the guys get a little that I work with get a little bit, I don't know, upset when I'm tough on the catchiness, because I don't want it to be derivative of something else. And there's so many more songs than there were when Crucify was written in Cornflake Girl that you have to be really aware that you're not writing somebody else's song. So sometimes being catchy, you have to be catchy but original. And with each year, that gets a little bit more challenging. Just statistically, there are only so many notes. So you're having to really kind of weave these real busy spider webs that might be more complicated than they need to be because I'm trying to not repeat something. So that's where that comes in, that kind of tension from the composing side. Because sometimes the guys are like, we like to, before you did this rewrite on the B section, this is like, what is this change? And you're going, it's too much like something from Choir Girl Hotel.
Right. So it's an avoidance of repeating yourself or echoing something too familiar.
Too familiar. But I do believe that most songwriters, I do anyway, gravitate to certain patterns or certain things. That's just sort of their style.
Yes.
They just happen to always kind of move into that kind of vibe.
Right.
Because that's, I don't know, that's their stamp. But it's also working with trying to push yourself into different styles too sometimes. And that can be a little scary because if you're not known for something, going into songs that you might not be your signatures can be a challenge. But I think you should try.
Yeah, of course. That's how you keep growing. It seems like your songwriting, you're 56 now. It seems like you're just getting stronger and more interesting as a songwriter. And it's probably those risks that keep happening.
Well, thank you for that. I think it is a challenge because, like I said, with each year, with thousands and gazillions of songs coming out every year and still trying to find originality, but things that stay with somebody, that's the trick.
Yeah, right. Okay, there's a line on page 244 that I love so much. It seems like it could have come out of Sunset Boulevard or something. You said, Madame Fame is a ruthless mistress to serve. I'm convinced she's a sadist. Tell us about that. Tell us about Fame.
Oh, well, perhaps I had the delusion in my mind that if I were ever to have some success in music and a songwriter for something that I felt good about, that then that would just, it'd be roses, right?
Right.
Be good.
We're good.
And, yeah, we're good. But the crazy thing is you begin to then have to learn about approval from people, approval from your peers who used to be your heroes, approval from record companies, press, and withholding that approval. And then you have to say to yourself, hang on a minute. What am I trying to write toward? Approval? Or am I trying to push myself as an artist and listen to people's stories and reflect that? Because they can be two very, very, very different things. And sometimes just because you're top of the charts doesn't mean it's great art. It just doesn't mean that.
Right.
We know that. But there is an understanding sometimes that because you've had a success in the entertainment industry and you have, the awards being thrown your way, that you've made great art. And that is not true. That means we're not going to go into how these award shows work, but it means that you might be popular, or you might have a label that has a lot of people that are voting on these, things. And so you have to really say to yourself, what is my relationship with notoriety and fame? What is fame? Because fame is not integrity, and fame is not great art.
Right.
Now, you'd think great art usually gets seen, but it doesn't always get heard or always get seen. Right. And because that for one reason is because some people don't get nurtured and have the exposure. And some artists just say, I don't have the stomach for this. I can't deal with this boys club, because there is one. That doesn't mean there aren't some women in it now that are trying to balance it out and getting involved in the executive side, and other people from the LGBTQ community who have brought a different support to the industry. There is that. But you have to ask yourself, why am I creating art?
Yeah.
And that's a big question.
I'm always struck by the fact that during the 1970s, when David Bowie was recording, Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane and the whole Berlin phase, Low and Heroes, Lodger, Scary Monsters, he didn't get a single Grammy nomination. Not even a nomination. I mean, that to me is so remarkable that an artist can do all that and not get recognized. I'll just leave that there. But
well, you can leave that with me, honey.
It's a gift.
You can leave that with me. I know how it works, and it just shows you, because those records, wow, they're affecting, and they're pillars of why people get into making records. Those records.
And then they change people's lives at a personal level too. So I know that's true for me. So anyway. Just leaving that there.
Yeah, that's good, though, that people are hearing, because you have to sometimes really think those that get notoriety and those who are in that club aren't necessarily those who are making things that will last for 40, 50, 60 years. Yeah. That's very different. And can those be the same? Sometimes. Yeah, they can, but it can be more complicated. If somebody's a recluse and doesn't want to hang with that gang, then, you're not at those parties and you're not at those things, or you don't have somebody that's in that circle pushing you. So it's a bit of a cluster.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to throw out a few questions from the audience, so to speak, mostly messages I got on social media, but one individual named Matt asks, what young artists today remind you of your younger self?
There are quite a few. There are quite a few, but I usually don't name them, and I'm going to tell you why. Yeah. In the early 90s, when this question would be asked, to say one person that was so influential to me and they didn't name me, it kind of made me blue. It made me sad. It made me kind of like, oh. And so I really don't want to exclude somebody, because I'd only be pulling a couple out of many that are really good.
Another fan asks, I won't read the entire thing, but essentially the context is you are unique. You're not supposed to modify unique and say very unique. You're unique. There's Tori Amos music, and it is its own thing, its own special thing. But that said, do you feel a kinship with certain other artists in music, like Kate Bush before you, or Florence Welch after, a certain kind of mysticism, a certain energy? Do you feel some kinship with other musicians like that?
Yeah, of course. I think that when you find, and the book talks about this a lot, when you find your true north, and I had it as when I was younger and a younger creator. And then I started chasing different things and trying on every different style, imagining trying on every kind of style of fashion for the last 200 years. And so I was trying that on for a 10-year period, at least, maybe longer. And then realized that the glove from, the early 19th century, and this from the 17th century, and this from the 50s, and this from the 70s, and then this from the future 100 years from now, what I'm thinking becomes my own style, then that's how you begin to find what it is your true north and the people you're talking about, and many others. Whether some found it earlier on, but for some of us, it took a little while, and that's okay that it takes a while. That's just part of the journey. Some people at 17 know, I'm an English folk singer. That's what I am, and that's all I'm going to do, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But other people are going, well, I can play jazz and I can play classical and I like folk, but I want to maybe mix it all up with gospel as well, and find my own type of expression. And that might take a little time. So
there's a question in the margins here from another fan who Chrissy, who asks, imposter syndrome is a real nightmare for women in any industry. It's something I've struggled with for most of my adult life. Christy said, I'd like to know if Tori ever felt it while growing up.
Oh, yeah, Chrissy. Yeah, this is the whole conversation about intention. And being an imposter, though, you can be an imposter, as we all know, in our friendship group, say. So if there's the funny one, and then there's the one, it's really archetypal sometimes. Yeah. And you find that we're back to slots and that you're filling this slot in the group or in the family. You know, one is the caretaker, one is, I don't know, the traveler, one is this or that. And we're getting kind of, I'm simplifying it more than it is. Usually these relationships, it's a bit more complex, the archetype that you're slipping into. But then it's giving yourself the freedom. And I tried to do this with American Doll Posse, that record.
Yes.
Which is trying on the whole Greek pantheon of women. Not the whole, I tried it on with 5. So Persephone, Demeter, Artemis, Athena, and Aphrodite. And so it was really investing in these archetypes and their myths in a music form. And I learned something out of that. I think I expanded a bit as a person. I began to see that I had a little bit more of those women in me than I thought I did. I just had never allowed myself because in my family or my friendship group, I was this character. And sometimes what I think is really healthy is when friendship groups say, hey, let's allow each other to expand. And not always you are the caretaker. Maybe you can be the funny one too.
Isn't Cornflake Girl sort of about that too? Is like a friendship group and a role someone plays in that?
It's about betrayal too.
Right.
So it's within a friendship or a relationship. It's about the idea of finding that you're in something that is not empowering anymore.
Right.
That it's oppressive. And I talk about the book that inspired it by Alice Walker that exposed to me for the first time the very serious issue of FGM, female genital mutilation. And so that was, reading that book from Alice Walker was the beginning while I was talking to my dear friend Karen Benz, who I work with still.
Nice.
And we were talking about the idea of betrayal within female friendships.
Yeah. There's a question also from a fan, and I like this one because I am also a food writer, so I relate to this, but she wanted to know about the role of tea in your creative process. And actually, she refers to the book. You talk about some days it's a green tea morning, some days it's a black tea morning. Do you have a tea ritual? Does that, is there a certain tea that's best for songwriting? What is tea How does that
Well,
apply?
yeah, I'm feeling the vibes of my husband in the other room because he loves this wonderful green tea that's ridiculously expensive. And he says to me, wife, they're just so expensive. And he loves green tea and makes great green tea. So I will have some of his green tea because it's very, very good. I'm a black tea person a lot of the time, but it's loose tea. And so we just have a brew going all day, at least 2 pots around here all the time.
Just all day. It's not just a morning thing.
Oh, it's all day. Yeah, it's all day.
You're not a coffee person at all.
I'm not, but the coffee machine's going too all day.
Why is it going if you're not just for your husband or for someone else?
No, coffee. Coffee is, Tash really likes coffee, my daughter, 19.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to get, we have time for one more. This is a question from a fan and it's an interesting one. So I think I'll ask it. This is also from Matt. He says, you cover a different song in the Lizard Lounge portion of your live shows. Of any of the songs you've covered, which one do you wish that you had written? Or is there a song out there that you wish that you had written?
I guess one of the ones I wish I'd written quite a few.
Yeah.
Blue Raincoat, Leonard Cohen, one of the great songs.
Yeah, that's an intense song.
Yeah, it's an amazing song, right? And River by Joni Mitchell. That's one.
River. Yeah.
There's so many songs I wish I would have written, but hey ho. But at least you get to cover them. And that's why the Lizard Lounge exists, because it's an opportunity to play these amazing songs, to be an interpreter of some
the way you cover them, you almost do rewrite them sometimes. I mean, I remember the Smells Like Teen Spirit cover so well, and it seemed like a completely new beast. You know, when you took it under your wing, it seemed to transform. So it's different than just covering. It's sort of like adopting or something.
Well, I find that the songs will let you go in and explore. I say explore their bones. They will let you go in there and tromp around if you're respectful, and if they feel that you're trying to give it a different viewpoint, but honor them completely. And all the covers that I've done, they're not piss takes, as they say in England. they're not jokey for the most part. I can't remember me doing that. There could have been one show out of the thousands that I've done, but mainly it's to honor the song. Sure. And so that's a different approach than I think if you're having fun. But there's some songs that I really love, and I just realized I shouldn't be doing that Bill Withers tune. I just don't have the right. I don't have it.
Really? That's
yeah. Or Steve Miller or whatever. There's some Bill Withers I'll do, but there have been songs that I happen to like, and I'll just say, this is for somebody else to cover.
So interesting. Well, unfortunately, we don't get applause. Normally, we would do a big auditorium in New York.
Well, I'll give you applause.
Yeah,
I thought you did great. You had some great stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
You made it easy. So it's an honor meeting you this way and talking to you.
And you too. And say hi to your daughter, the singer-songwriter in her bedroom, and wish her the best. Yeah. And tell her I look forward to hearing her music someday.
Oh, thanks so much, Tori. Good luck to you, okay? And stay in touch.
Okay.
Now I don't know what we do.
It looks really nice on top of that.
Okay. Well, why change that? Honestly, I've had this for 20 years.
Is it Walford?
Yes.
They always come through with their base.